Responsiveness is one of those tangibles that leads to trust and credibility. As a leader, it is your job to stop the chaos.
You, as the person receiving this information, have the opportunity to say, all right, is this actually urgent? You're telling me it's urgent, great. How do I want to respond to that? We say manage your mind. We mean give yourself pause. Don't just react, even though you want to, because you've told yourself a story. If I don't do it right now, something's going to happen that I'm not going to be able to handle. Dinesh, I want you to play along with me here.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So imagine you are away from the office. Let's say you're doing something for you. You're at your barbecue workshop, or you're with your family, and ding, you hear the phone ring, and you pick it up and you see it's an email, and it's from a client, and the subject matter is, I need you to call me ASAP. What are things that go through your mind? And what do you do in situations like this?
That's a great question. I probably have a little bit of a different view than most people. And I have to say that what works for me probably wouldn't work for someone else, and what works for someone else probably doesn't work for me. But it's so highly fact dependent. It is absolutely fact dependent. Things that would go into influencing what I did or what I thought would be, what day is it? What time of day are we talking about? If we're talking about Monday at 10 o'clock of a work day where I am, away from the office, about to board a flight or something like that, that's a totally different story than a Sunday night at 9 o'clock or something like that, right? And I think I'm not trying to lead what way I would come out, because something at 9 o'clock could be even more urgent than something at Monday at 10 o'clock, right? And so I'd need more information to be able to tell you what I would do. But assuming it's a regular work day and I'm out, at a seminar or a conference, and I see my phone, I would tend to call back right away. I value and I prioritize responsiveness, because responsiveness is one of those tangibles that leads to trust and credibility. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that responsiveness is a way for people to measure, how reliable you are.
Yeah.
And so I tend to prioritize responsiveness over, setting a boundary for the sake of boundaries, right?
Sure.
And I think if 9 times out of 10 I'm responsive, the one time that I'm not, people are more likely to say, okay, well, that's a legitimate boundary, or I can understand why he didn't reply back. That's a long way of saying a very legal, lawyer oriented answer, that it really depends, maybe.
Of course, there is nuance. And I don't think we could really paint a scenario that would accurately represent every variable to consider for the sake of this podcast, right? So there is absolutely that to just say right off the bat. It's nuanced. It depends. And also I love what you said about being responsive. That is something that you recognize as a personal value to you, that you want to see in other people, that you recognize as valuable in other people, and also for you to be that person for the people in your life.
Right.
That's a really high sense of awareness that you have. I don't know that for me, in a past version of myself, I would have been really clear on what my personal values were and whether or not I was acting in accordance with them, or whether other people were acting in accordance with them.
Yeah. I think what happens a lot is that we're not clear on what our priorities are. Let me give you an example, right? Let's say you have coaching clients, right? And your business is to coach people through Zoom. And you have set up a meeting with your VA or your accountant or something like that.
Sure.
And a client messages you and say, hey, I need to talk right now. You're in the middle of this business call that is an internal call. A lot of people I've seen would say, no, I've scheduled this time with the accountant. This needs to get done.
Mhm.
This is my priority. I'm going to
Mhm.
finish this meeting and then get back to the client.
Mhm.
I actually have a slightly different perspective. Your business doesn't exist without that coaching client.
Mhm.
And there's no need to have an accounting conversation or an internal VA conversation without a business.
Mhm.
So I dynamically try to prioritize the thing that matters most in that moment because we can have all these internal meetings all we want. There's no money
Mhm.
coming in the door.
Mhm.
There is no business and there's no need to have those meetings, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I, in that scenario, would say, hang on 1 second, I need to reschedule this. The thing that keeps the light on is the client that needs me right now. And so I'm going to get off the phone with you and go to that meeting. Now, having said that, after a bit of experience in whatever aspect of life you're in, you can anticipate 90% of urgencies and you can build systems and redundancies in your own life for yourself of where those types of urgencies or things that parachute into your life aren't as disruptive. You can manage your mind. So you can default less to a reaction and more to a response. And if anyone thinks that, hey, life is not going to throw you curveballs, I can tell you I get a curveball 3, 4 times a day. And it's all about how do you manage that and how do you see yourself, I think, because as a leader, wherever we all are, we're all leaders. This has been articulated on the podcast before. As a leader, it is your job to stop the chaos. If you think about yourself at a level, at a stratosphere,
Mhm.
there's chaos above you.
Mhm.
It is your job to stop the chaos from permeating below you. And if there's chaos below you, it's your job to stop the chaos from permeating above. Let me explain what that means. Client calls and something happens outside of your control. If you let that pass through you, my son gets a concussion and I start freaking out, my daughter's going to freak out then, right? If there's an urgency in my law firm, in someone who's working, let's say there's a health emergency or financial emergency or something else, they can't do it. I let that pass through me to the client. That's not a good thing. And so that's what I mean as a leader. High levels of managing your mind so you're responding as opposed to reacting is what can be beneficial when these types of urgency and curveballs come your way.
Mhm.
What about you? Let's tell me your perspective.
What comes to mind for me is that I feel like I'm like a lot of other women who listen to this podcast, in that we are coming from the lens of some of us, depending on where we are in our journey, we're people pleasing
Hmm.
and we don't know that we're people pleasing.
Mhm.
And we're wondering why we're so exhausted all the time and why it feels so hard, and why we just need a minute to catch a breath. And in the moment, it feels like, quote unquote, no one's giving us that moment, right? That's what, at least those are thoughts that I've had in the past.
Mhm.
Then you come into this sense of awareness of like, okay, I'm people pleasing
Mhm.
and I don't really know how to stop. I don't know what to do with that piece of information, but now I'm aware of this tendency and that
Mhm.
it's not actually serving me.
Mhm.
And then, you kind of just progress, right? So it depends on where you are in your journey. But in order to do what you just said, right,
Yeah.
which I completely agree with, as we're all leaders by default or by choice, as people, if we want to create more ease and walk away from many of the stressful situations that can happen without it just jarring us all the time, right? It's a lot of emotional volatility if we continue to allow the circumstances to dictate what we do.
Yeah.
If we're looking to build some resilience and stability, I do agree with you that you as the person receiving this information have the opportunity to say, all right, is this actually urgent? If you're telling me it's urgent, great. How do I want to respond to that?
Mhm.
Um, and for people pleasers, whether you're a man or a woman or somewhere in between, I don't know how people identify on the show, but that people pleasing, that's another contender with which you're dealing when you're making decisions like this.
Mhm.
When you're unwiring that, oh, I've got to do everything for everybody,
Mhm.
or for fear that I'm going to get reprimanded, lose my job, somebody's going to get hurt, somebody's going to be mad at me.
Mhm.
Those are all things that kind of come through my mind when things like this happen, whether it's with my kid or with a client or whoever.
Mhm.
And I have found that it is immensely helpful when someone's putting urgency on me, to stop and just let that sit for a second. Because it's very easy to be like, oh my gosh, they said for me to call them ASAP, so I'm just going to call. And meanwhile, there's other things going on, or you yourself are not mentally in a place where, yeah, you're calling them back, but are you calling them back from a mindset that is able to focus and actually be helpful for what they need you for? Because if you're
Yeah.
calling them back in a frenzy, that's not helpful to anybody.
Right. But isn't a lot of that a fictional story that we make up in our mind about what the consequence is of not calling back? Because a lot of urgency, no one puts urgency on anyone, right? The urgency is created. I mean, the words ASAP mean, you know, as soon as possible,
Right.
and it doesn't mean right now.
Right.
And so a lot of that is how we interpret it. But I want
Exactly.
to come back to your people pleasing topic. I'm not sure if people pleasing registers in my mind as much as not having clear priorities, right? For the person, because you can say that it's a people pleasing tendency, but I think the root of that is not having clear priorities. And let me read you a quote from someone. I won't tell you who it is, but I want you to tell me what you think of this quote, okay? Ready?
Okay.
Rivers do not drink their own water. Trees do not eat their own fruit. The
Mhm.
sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We're all born to help each other, no matter how difficult it is. Life is good when you're happy, but much better when others are happy because of you. Reactions? Then I'll tell you who said it.
And I think that there is truth. And I think that while that is true, there are also other truths that can be valid at the same time.
Yeah.
And I will say, I agree with you in that, yes, nothing has meaning until you assign it meaning. So when somebody says ASAP,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're the one saying, oh my gosh, that means right now. Or, oh, okay, well, I'm about to get on a plane. It's not
Mm-hmm.
really possible for me right now. I'm okay with waiting until I'm off the plane and I've
Yeah.
got my bags and I'm at my hotel. Yeah.
Yeah.
But people pleasing, I don't think it's as simple as just priorities. There's a lot of trauma that can go into it. There's also a lot of just negative repercussions. People experience things differently. While priorities are really helpful in a way of helping people to stop the people pleasing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes, all the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as simple as, oh, you're a people pleaser because your priorities are out of line. No,
Mm-hmm. Explain. Say more.
I'll just speak from my perspective. When you grow up in a culture with societal, familial expectations of you will listen,
Mm-hmm.
and when you don't listen, you're going to get yelled at. There's always fear of some sort of repercussion.
Yeah.
And so it's not about my priorities, it's about safety.
Mm-hmm.
In any moment, we're acting out of fear or we're acting out of love.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two basic human emotions, right? You know that. So it's just varying shades of those things. If you're succumbing to people pleasing, it is the fear-based thinking of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose my job. Oh my gosh, I don't want them to think poorly of me. Oh my gosh, I don't want to create more of a problem because I didn't call them back.
Right. But those
Right?
are assumptions at some level, right? Those we go back to the
Fear
meaning
is
we're
false
assigning.
evidence appearing as real. Of
Right.
course, they're of course it's assumptions.
Right.
Now, there may be truth to that,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't make it true
Right.
holistically,
Mm-hmm.
unequivocally.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as you said earlier, it's very nuanced. It
Yeah.
depends on the situation. If
Yeah.
you are a physician on call and you know you've got patients that are in life or death situations, and that's why they're calling you, ASAP means ASAP right now, this second. But
Mm-hmm.
you're mentally also in a space where you're like, I know I'm on call.
Yeah.
And I know if I receive a call to come in or to respond, you know your priorities are in line.
Right.
But we're not talking about those pre-protected situations. We're talking about you're bopping along, you're about to get on a plane, and boom, you get this phone call. Somebody's got a health scare, or oh, client says that they need you,
Yeah.
or a lot of times our kids come in and they're like, well, I really need something right now.
Right.
And what they believe is right now, not that it's not important to them,
Yeah.
but there is a level of like, okay, I believe that you think it's right now that
Right.
you need this.
Yeah.
Let's there's an element of let's teach you to understand what's really important versus urgent versus I can wait.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. But what happens when it's two competing interests, not between yourself and someone else's demand, but
Mhm.
legitimately between two demands? I think that's where what we're coming back to is that, by the way, I didn't tell you who the quote was. You want to guess?
Actually don't feel like I want to guess. No, I wanna just know.
No, Pope Francis, the
Okay.
late Pope Francis, who
Yeah.
just passed away.
Ah.
He said that on the morning of the 41st day of quarantine,
Mm.
right? Yeah, so going back to what happens when it's two competing interests, and I'll give you an
Mhm.
example. We were just on a vacation for
Mhm.
spring break. We're in Turks and Caicos, right?
Mhm.
And we were with two other families from school. And I think we got there Sunday.
'Kay.
And on Tuesday, I get a phone call that my mom had a little bit of a fall and she had to go to the hospital. And so we started thinking, like, okay, somebody's got to be there. You know, my dad is blind, right? Somebody's got to be there. And then on Wednesday, we found out she got intubated because she has severe airway collapse
Mm.
and pneumonia and went to the ICU, right? And so now Anjana and I are thinking, like, okay, here are two competing interests. My parents need me. We're on vacation. We're out of the country, right? There's actually three competing interests that went through my mind. Going to my parents, right? Protecting the kids, because like I mentioned again, the chaos has to stop. Now, if I start moping around or freaking out or start packing my bag and saying, like, that's going to be received by them in a much different way than an adult would receive it. So my job is to protect them from that. And the third competing interest is if I should leave, am I sort of putting the kids and Anjana in harm's way to travel back from out of the country with, you know, all the suitcases and the strollers and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of possibilities that went through my mind.
Mhm.
And luckily you know, we've been through a lot of health scares. My
Yeah.
mom's been in the hospital, and through those learnings we've built redundancies, we built systems and things like
Yeah.
that. My brother was able to drive down. Thankfully he's close by enough to drive down. My sister was able to go. We have someone there who can help out. And um you know, we were able to manage the urgency. And I think that that's what we're saying here, is that the world is always going to put various demands on your time, the
Yeah.
world, regardless of who they are. And it isn't up to us to judge the urgency,
Mhm.
because like you said, you know, the kid comes in and says, I need this right now. It's up to us to manage where we put our focus and
Mhm.
where how we can better respond,
Sure.
as opposed to allowing that wave of chaos to flow
Exactly.
over us. And here's why I mentioned the boundaries, because sometimes you just can't do anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When we found out at 9 in the morning or 5 in the morning when I woke up that she was intubated, the first flight wasn't until 5 p.m.
Mhm.
Right? So I can spend 12 hours stewing and ruminating and being, you know, afraid of what is going to happen or not happen. Um, but or we can sort of, you know, think about a more thoughtful response,
Yes.
as opposed to, and that comes from managing ourselves,
Correct.
less so than determining what is urgent or not urgent, or whether the client really needs it, or this patient's going to die or not.
Sure.
um, you know, I can tell you, if any physician gets a phone call that says you're on call me ASAP, and they're trapped behind an airbag because they just had a wreck,
Mhm.
they're not calling. And I
Sure.
think that leads to another important point that I think we might have touched about. When we are unable to respond to someone else's demands, whether it's urgent or not, like come to my party, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever it is.
Mhm.
A lot of us do a mental gymnastics of the reasoning that we have,
Mhm.
and we judge whether that reason is acceptable to someone else,
We
right?
have touched on this, but
Right.
it's great to bring up again.
Yeah.
And
So,
before you go further, love to your family.
oh,
Um,
thank you. Thank
yeah.
you. So someone invites me over to their party or to their house, and I say, no, I don't want to come because I don't like that part of town. I'm thinking that they're going to be like, well, that's a crappy reason. Or if I legitimately tell them, like, hey, I have the flu. I don't want to come get people sick at your house. Oh,
Mhm.
that's a good enough reason, right? And
Mhm.
we have to be careful, because while the reasons on the edges are clear, like, okay, well, Dinesh, that's kind of silly. You don't want to go to that part of town. You live in that part of town. Come on, dude, right?
Mhm.
Being sick is a legitimate reason. But let's say you're like, you know what? I'm just not feeling it today.
Yeah.
I'm a little off, or I've had a long week, right? Or I really need to sit down and get my taxes done or something like that because I'm traveling the next 2 weeks. We are constantly putting stress on ourselves because we're determining whether that reason is acceptable to that person or
Mhm.
not. There's a really powerful thought that I keep in mind that being late is a problem until you realize someone is sick, right? Someone being sick is a problem until you realize someone died.
Mhm.
Someone dying is a problem until you realize like your house is on fire. Now, I think I butchered it, but the seriousness of the competing interest is what determines the lens we look at the thing that's in front of us that's demanding
Right.
our attention.
Right, right. Well, I think in terms of, all right, so what do I do with that? It really is important. When we say manage your mind, we mean give yourself pause. Don't just react, even though you want to, because you've told yourself a story. If I don't do it right now,
Right.
something's going to happen that I'm not going to be able to handle, or it's going to be more of a problem, or I might lose my job, I might, whatever. Just give yourself a moment, because when you make a decision out of reactivity or fear, you're literally only operating from the less evolved, less capable parts of your nervous system. And so your critical thinking and your solution seeking abilities are greatly hampered.
Right.
So just because a client says, call me ASAP, I'll give you an example of this is just the power of slowing down. I was actually in a client meeting
Hmm.
2 weeks ago, and I get a text from my son who tells me, I've got a splitting headache. Please come get me. I can't even focus. My head really hurts. And now I'm like, okay, well, we have those systems built in place, right? My phone's on do not disturb, except for the kids and
Hmm.
Manish, right? Those are the three people that can get to me despite having my phone on
I
do not
can't break
disturb.
through to do not disturb. What is
Sorry.
up with that?
Sorry.
Oh man.
But no. And so I'm sitting here and I told the client, excuse me, there's a text from my son. There's a problem. Let me just give me a minute, right, to read it. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, like, okay, your kid's in pain. Mama bear instincts want to immediately say, oh my gosh, I'm going to go get you. I'm going to, do anything I can. But
Yeah.
wait, but wait, like, you've got a headache. Yes. Okay. I acknowledge that you're in pain. At the same time, I have 20 more minutes of this session that I am in the middle of.
Hmm.
And have you, what have you done as someone who's telling me you need help? Tell me what you have done. Did you go to the nurse? The answer was no. Have you had some water? No. Okay, well, all right then. I'll circle back with you in a little bit. So I finished the client call, understanding that there is an interest. I chose the client in the moment, which in a previous life, it would have been way harder for me to do. But I'm glad I did, because later, after I got off with the client, he says, don't come get me. I think I was dehydrated. I'm feeling much better.
Mm,
Right.
that's good. Yeah.
But so often, especially as parents, when it's our kids, or when it's like a client that's particularly difficult, or a case that's high stakes, we want to be so reactive out of, fear. And
Yeah.
so just taking that moment to say, all right, what can I do? What do I want to do? Because oftentimes when they bring urgency to you, they have not paused themselves,
Right. Yeah.
right?
And a lot of times, what we're saying is not gospel or doctrine or a way of showing that there's a better way to live. What we're just hoping to explore on this podcast is some suggestions for what's possible. And everything is so factually dependent. It really changes. I remember I was working with a coach once and we're talking about this topic about being reactive. And he was telling me that one day he saw his son fall out of a tree and broke his leg and the bone popped out. And, he sort of took a pause and interjected a pause, sort of like, let's see what's going on here. And there's little tricks where you can slow your mind down,
Yeah.
where before you do something, you sort of just count to 3 or 5 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I used to watch, I think it's Family Matters. Carl Winslow
Yeah.
used to
You shared that.
say 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What the heck is bothering me? When Steve Urkel would come in, right? So
Hmm.
there's these little pauses that you can build into your life to prevent you from jumping into a reactionary mode and think about responsiveness. And
Right.
I think a lot of times urgent urgent things don't progress as quickly as we think they might, right?
Exactly.
So in the example of my coach telling me his son broke his leg and the bone was sticking out, well, it's not going to get much worse than that in the
Right.
moment, right?
Right.
Over 6 months, his leg might not look so good,
Right.
but in the 1 to 4 hours, it's not going to get much worse, right?
Right.
And if you don't believe me, look at people going to ERs and they're just
Mhm.
sitting in the waiting room, right?
Yeah.
You're in the emergency room, and the emergency room has to triage,
To
right?
triage you. Yeah.
Um, and while some people might listen to this podcast and feel that we're maybe pontificating, like, look how good we're able to manage our mind. When you go to the ER, there is an intake person there who takes your credit card, your driver's license, your ID, asks you what's wrong. And if that person is responsive to everyone who walks in from, in the ER, it would be total chaos. So
Hmm.
you have to adopt the mindset that, this is something that in the long run will be beneficial if you're able to just triage the things that come your way.
Right. Right. And I think that, so here's the thing. In the moment, this is great, right? If we can start to practice, take a beat, take a moment, take a breath, slow it down.
Mhm.
It's really, really helpful because you're shifting your nervous system. Now you've got access to different parts of your brain that you don't have access to if you don't. Um, and then there's the work that you mentioned that can only happen when there's not an active quote unquote fire, when there's not
Yeah.
an urgency, right? So training your nervous system to be stronger at rest is actually going to prevent it from going offline. So, and what I mean by that is, I'm going to say meditation, but that does not mean going in a cave and sitting and like, whatever people think that to mean. It just simply means spending time focusing on your breath when there's no urgency. I love what you said about priorities, understanding what it is that I value most. For me, making sure that I'm being present for people when I speak to them,
Yeah.
then that's something that I'm aware of now. When there's not a fire,
Right.
I know that. And I have thought about, okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
Right.
So that when there is a fire, I get an email saying, I need to talk to you ASAP, or my kid or something.
Yeah.
I understand that the most important thing for me is to be present. So what do I need to do to be able to be that person that is super present? Because I can be responsive all day long. But
Yeah.
if I'm just responding and my brain is elsewhere, not helpful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
just aligning and under thinking for yourself, what are things that are my priorities? What are things that I value? And how can I actually embody those values so that I am, to honor the late Pope Francis, right? So that I am of service
Yeah.
to others.
Right.
And in so doing, a service to myself.
Yeah. Two other points that I think are worth mentioning briefly. Once you have a sense of the obligations in your life or the
Yeah.
demands on your time, it's worthwhile to install some systems, some redundancies to help buffer the urgencies that come up. You know that your kid is in school, and sometime in the 18 years that they're going to be in school, there's going to be a reason to pick them up.
Yeah.
You just know that's going to happen, right?
Right.
And you can plan or you can fail to plan. And you can be somewhat prepared for some of these things to not be complete surprises. The other thing, and I think this is a hard truth, and I think for a lot of what we said is applicable to a lot of people. But sometimes, depending on our history and our, sort of our biography, we're unaware that sometimes we might be addicted or gravitate to chaos
Mm-hmm.
or the significance that comes from the chaos, right?
Correct.
And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's a very sort of heavy topic to get into. But I would say that it's worthwhile for everyone to just stop. and think about, what is your baseline? What is your normal today? What was it 10 years ago? What was it 20 years ago? And start to see if there is a pattern of maybe your upbringing was filled with a lot of urgency. And what is your baseline? If your baseline is urgency and reactions and jumping to conclusions and things like that, it might just be that that's what's familiar. And
Correct.
that's what's familiar. It might just be that's what you're naturally drawing towards yourself because
Yeah.
that feels familiar. And the quickest way and the least inflammatory way to describe this is, as a lawyer, when I do depositions, it is a good thing to sit without saying anything. Just sit in silence. And a lot of us know that when there's silence, we feel this pull to fill the silence, right? You want to talk. And that's exactly what lawyers do, is when we sit in silence, we want the witness to just start vomiting and start talking and keep going, like, keep going, right? And that's a really sort of non-inflammatory way of highlighting this point of what is your familiar. If your familiar is urgency and chaos and things like that, that may be an area where it's specific to you. And perhaps that's an area that if you're not happy with, or that's something you'd like to change, that's the place to start, as opposed to the tools that we talked about. Because
Hmm.
tools that we talked about are not going to be impactful if the urgencies are created, because that's your home base. That's where you go back to
Yeah.
all the time, right?
Yeah. That it goes back to, again, aligning your priorities, because it really is, we don't attract what we want. We
Mhm.
attract things based on who we're being. So if we're this chaotic person, take a look around. And I love how you said, if you're feeling like there's a lot of chaos and you're getting tired of it, or you wanting to put that down, just take a look and see, who you're a product of the people you spend the most time with. And um, our lives are created as a mirror of our own inner mental thoughts and where we are spiritually. When you can get clear on what those priorities are and whether those are actually the ones that align with you, that can really be helpful, so that you can start to be that person that you want to be, rather than just by default operating on what's familiar.
Right.
um yeah, yeah. And one, my final thought too, is before we go to put the urgency on someone else, right? That's the other thing. As a leader, you mentioned it's our job. I don't think we can stop the chaos, but I do believe that we can hold space, we can soften it, we can mitigate it, use any word you want, right? We can make it to where we're not consistently just being ruled by it.
Hmm.
And in many cases it can be avoided. um and one of the keys to doing that is to make sure we're just not the conduit. And when you as a person have a situation that comes up, they're also taking a pause and just asking yourself, even from the context of time,
Hmm.
is this going to matter in the next 5 minutes,
Hmm.
the next 5 months, the next 5 years? It can oftentimes sort of give you perspective as to actually how urgent it is. I know, even when you have like littles running around and they knock over a glass of water because you've told them, like, don't run, walk, be careful, there's stuff there, and something gets knocked over, immediately we want to jump and be like, oh my gosh, let's grab the towels, let's this, let's that. Well, you're not going to affect the outcome there significantly enough.
Right.
And instead you wind up yelling at the kid, and maybe you like run on your way to clean up the mess and you trip and you break your toe because you hit it on the table leg.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can be avoided simply by just taking that beat. And so I love that you talk about you actually being the gatekeeper there to decide what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Both ways.
Yeah.
From what's coming outside or what's coming from inside. I think that that's one of the traits of leadership that isn't talked about enough, of where it's your job to intercept, to make sense of the chaos, and then figure out the best ways to respond.
Yeah. So in short, make some time to pause daily, just take a quick stock of what kind of energy you're around and whether that's suiting you. Maybe do a values assessment. There's all sorts of free ones online, or reach out to Dinesh or myself. We can send you one. All sorts of things that you can do when there's not an urgent active thing. And then when there is an active thing, take a breath. Remember that, nothing is ever as it seems. And we absolutely have the power, maybe not to whether or not we experience something, but we do control how we experience it. And we're always cheering you guys on, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in.